Sorry, it's the first. Let's leave this on just in case. So we have to choose some. Last one is the use cases. Yes, good. Okay.
Control L maybe? Full screen?
Yes. Thank you. Control
L.
L.
All right, ready to rock and roll.
Let me swap this in as well.
You ready to play?
Good.
All right, good afternoon. This is DOTS. Hopefully that's what you're here for. My name is Roman Danilio.
And Tobias Gonrom. We have the blue sheets going round. Can you please fill in your name? Thank you.
So next slide. So just to make sure, you've seen this probably in other meetings, but the note well applies, and this is new text. Next slide. So we have the blue sheets going around. Frank is taking our notes. Thank you. And do we have a Jabber scribe? Oh, could we have a Jabber scribe? Would anyone volunteer? Is Chris volunteering there in the back? Thank you, Chris Inacio, for volunteering.
You want some chocolate cookie? You need some cookies to get you on calories? Oh, okay, then I can't help you.
So we pulled an agenda together. We're going to be talking early on about some of the implementation experience, what happened at the hackathon, and some individual vendors talking about implementation reports. We'll talk protocol drafts, and then we'll get to a few of the informationals, and we have enough time for some open mic as well. Would anyone like to bash this agenda? Okay, with that, we'll proceed. So next slide, please. To give an update of what's happened with the working group since we last got together, the drafts have seen updates, which is great. We had a virtual interim meeting on February 7th. We did a working group last call on requirements in December. We closed it in January. A number of updates occurred just to make sure that everything that needs to be in there is in there. We will be starting a short second working group last call on requirements. If you previously provided feedback in the first working group last call, all we would ask is that you just say, good to go. We just want to make sure we didn't miss anything. So we will be starting that right after this meeting, and we'll run it for 2 weeks. Also exciting news is, and we're going to have a presentation on it, is that there's a new implementation that's emerged from Arbor Networks, and they're going to be talking about that. Next slide. So schedule-wise, milestones have changed. We slipped on all of them, so we pushed everything kind of forward. So we are at the London meeting. We are going to issue the working group last call on the requirements document. That's going to get us into early April. We want to host a virtual interim meeting at the end of April. That's what you see there, and that'll be halfway between London and Montreal. Otherwise, we're notionally also planning to get a number of our informationals wrapped up. April may be a little ambitious. Probably in April of some kind, we're going to do working group last calls there. And we have a marker out for the August timeframe for the 2 protocol drafts to working group last call. So with that, We're back on the agenda, and first up is the hackathon report. I believe John and Konami, or Konami and John, I'm not sure how you guys planned it, so you're up, please.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. I'm Kanami Nishizuka from NTT Communications. Thank you for introduction. I'd like to talk about IETF hackathon report, which was on last weekend, and that is DOTS interrupt. And first of all, I'd like to thank to John for helping making this report. Next slide, please. Okay, here is our hackathon plan. We tested the interoperability between independent implementations in order to see the maturity of these core specifications of DOTS protocol. Now we have 4 implementations. One is NTT DOTS from NTT, which is OSS. So now its code is open to public. And the rest 3 are proprietary implementations from 3 different vendors. NCC Group, John is from, and ARBA, they couldn't attend the hackathon at this time, but Andrew from ARBA will do his presentation after this about the result of the internal testing. The Flowers implementation, which is based on NTT DOTS, then they are adding their own features on the OSS. Next slide, please. So here is the hackathon plan. Sorry, next slide, sorry. This spreadsheet is all about the achievement of the hackathon. We checked the implementation status and interoperability. The test was so successful because we could make it more green during the hackathon. Taking photos. So first, next slide, please. First, we enumerated the features of DOTS signal channel and data channel, then checked if it is supported by each implementation. This list may be helpful for you because the drafts are getting a little bit longer, so it makes it easy to understand what features are there and whether they are supported now or not. One achievement is that NTT DOTS was updated to support PSK mode of DTLS during the hackathon, and it was checked with John's implementation. Next slide, please. Yep. Next slide. So then we tested session configuration and mitigation request operations and ping each other. Unfortunately, we couldn't do the test against Huawei's implementation, but I hope they can talk to each other because it is based on NTT DOTS. Except that, as you see, the test result was all green. In addition, we did get and delete operations of mitigation request with MID and CUID in URI path, not URI query, URI path, which is the latest proposed feature and has not been included in the current draft, but it works better. And so it will be included the coming 18th version of signal channel draft. Next, please. So here is where we are. As you know, DOTS protocol protects the internet from DDoS attacks by making DDoS protection more effective with its programmatic capabilities. Then we confirmed that we can do cooperative DDoS protection between at least 2 independent implementations. Next slide, please. So this screen capture is one of the most impressive one of the hackathon. We did mitigation requests from OSS DOTS client, which is NTT DOTS, to proprietary DOTS server, NCC groups. And you may see that the protection of an IP address is successfully registered to their DOTS server. and which is actually a well-known DDoS protection appliance, DDoS Secure. Also, we did mitigation requests from NCC Group's DOTS client to NTT DOTS server, and also it worked well. Next slide, please. Yeah. So here shows what we learned during the hackathon. So I assure you that we can meet the expectation for DOTS protocol from market soon. It means the draft signal channel specification is almost stable. In the hackathon, we tested based on the latest specification, and it is proven to work. That must be good news for you. And we discussed and clarified a lot about the current draft text until we provided the feedback to the working group. And also we discussed about new features which could be added to the future DOTS specifications. Next, please. So here are the achievements in detail for a working group. I enumerated the interoperable features which worked successfully at the hackathon. First one is CRUD, CRUD operations on session configuration and mitigation request. Second one is gateway function on NCC group side. The third one is PKI and PSK mode on DTLS. The last one is CUID and MID in URI path. And regarding to the gateway functions, NTT DOTS client traffic to NCC group DOTS gateway relayed to NTT DOTS server with CDID addition. Then the usage of CDID is now under discussion because CUID, not CDID. CUID is globally unique, so finally distinct DOTS server can create resource location only by the CUID. So the purpose of introducing the CDID on gateway is a little bit ambiguous in the current draft. Actually, NTT and NCC group did interop test internally 3 times before the hackathon. So in preparation for the hackathon, we agreed on the trying the with the latest spec, 17th or later, and updated models, so as to comply with that. Also, from our side, NTT added copying capability. And we made many fixes of the code on both sides. The most of the fixes are related to encoding and decoding of CBOR format. And John is now actively contributing to libcorp library, so a libcorp function is enhanced and extended. So now it is supporting more function of DOTS. Then NTT DOTS changed the corp library from GoCorp to libcorp. And so in conclusion, the hackathon is not the only opportunity to do the interop testing. So I and John are happy if we could do more interop tests with other implementations before the next IETF or interview meeting. So this is the wrap-up slide. Thank you again to all of hackathon teammates and working group support. Thank you.
Yeah, just in sort of summary, I just really would like to thank the work that's done on NTT DOTS in terms of a base open source, because on that, as it's being developed, that will then help other people do implementations and all the rest of it. Our particular NCC group is proprietary, but that's fine because it creates differences. But it's just the thanks of the likes of you, the work you're doing on that, because that is just creating a stable platform that we can then base everything else off on. Any questions about this at all, or?
Yeah, just one clarification question. You mentioned there's some clarity. Yeah, Mohamed Boukader, Orange. You mentioned that there's some confusion about the interpretation of the client unique identifier. Can you please provide more information about that?
Okay, so during the hackathon, there was a debate about the CDID
Yeah.
as opposed to the CUID, where it should be, where's the right place. And the bottom line is that you have a set of DOTS clients which generate their own CUIDs, come in through a DOTS gateway, which then goes to an upstream DOTS server.
Mm-hmm.
The CUID and the CDID will be the same of all those individual clients, but will be different if any of those clients happens to be a DOTS gateway supporting devices behind. The CDID, as it arrives at the server, can be used for just control of this particular area, which may be a single device or maybe an internal DOTS gateway, can control the amount of resources it tries to consume or all those kind of things. Yeah? Does that help at all?
Yeah, and I understand this, which is just normal. But my question is there any clarification that you think that need to be added to the document, or?
I think we could perhaps add in sort of a half paragraph or something just to clarify some things. But we can talk about that through the mailing list and stuff. Yeah, thank you.
Tobias Gonrum, Huawei Working Group Chair Head Off. So I think this is awesome. I'm super happy to see these interoperability tests happening, and now that we have 2 implementations, that's great. You asked for whether there are any questions. I have a question which is potentially more for later the other implementers. Given that we have these 2 interoperability tests now, so can we expect for the next hackathon to maybe have 3 or 4 implementations doing these so that we can fill this metrics completely? That would be awesome. I don't know whether the other implementers want to speak to this now or later during the presentation. So yeah, I leave it at that.
Yeah, I think I'm planning to be in Montreal, and I'm hoping that at least we'll have some interoperability tests. Sorry, this is Andrew Mortensen. I'm hoping we'll be able to have some interoperability tests before the next interim as well.
Awesome. Okay, so if there are no items, again,
actually,
thank you so much.
One more question, actually. If you wouldn't mind. Kaname, you had said that you had chosen libcoap and replaced the GoCoApp. Can you speak to the reasons for that choice?
Why did you change from?
Yeah. Yes.
There's things like ping, there's things supporting the responses.
Yeah. That's correct. So, the GoCoApp is not supporting the co-op ping, and also, there are many functionality, lack of functionality in the Go implementation of co-op. So, and also, I think libcoap is the most referenced implementation of co-op. So I decided we should use libcoap because it is supporting more function than other libraries.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That moves us on to our next item on the agenda, where we have individual vendors that are going to talk about their implementation reports with the protocols. And first up is Arbor. So Andrew, we're bringing your slides up.
All right, thanks. I'm hoping everybody can still hear me.
We can, loud and clear. So we're on the introductory slide, slide 1.
All right, so this is a pretty brief implementation report on the work in progress we've got for an internal DOT server and client, which I am hoping we'll be able to see as open source in the relatively near future, but I don't want to make any promises yet. Anyway, we'll move on. Next slide. All right, so this is a partial implementation of the revision 17 of the signal channel draft. Internally, I have a working DOTS client and server talking to each other with PKI and PSK mutual authentication. It is using IPv4 and IPv6. Not happy eyeballs at this point yet. And I've been able to do largely local interop testing with NTT's implementation, and including over the weekend some testing based on the updated version that came out of the hackathon with a little bit of assistance from Kaname. Next slide, please. So there are a number of challenges we've run into. Partly in the interest of diversity, I chose to use Python. And there are a number of Python co-op frameworks, but only one appears to actually support DTLS. A lot of the implementations out there make a reference to coming soon, or DTLS is not supported. AIO co-op is using tiny DTLS, but tiny DTLS itself turns out to be limited in a number of ways. Next slide. There aren't really any good Python DTLS implementations that I was able to find. Tiny DTLS has been wrapped in a project called DTLS Socket, but it's limited to PSK, and the project maintainers have made it explicit that they are not planning to support PKI. So that restricts you right out of the bat, and it's only supporting CCM8 in the Cypher suites, which also restricts the particular choices you have when you're trying to communicate between the DOTS client and server. So I subsequently have wrapped embed TLS with Cython, and I have this now working with those selected projects down there, with the goal of releasing the DTLS implementation as open source for Python. Next slide. Like Kaname said about running into limitations with Go Co-op, I've run into some limitations with AIO Co-op. For example, the ping handling is unavailable to the application currently, which means that we aren't able to do the sort of deadman switch that we've talked about in, for example, the architecture draft. Non-handling of error responses causes an exception. So I was running into this with the Go dots implementation, where if you make a request that causes an error, then AIO Co-op would backtrace. And TCP support in AIO Co-op is currently very rudimentary. I do have a selection of patches that I'll be planning to submit upstream to AIO Co-op, and also the hope of adding support for the new DTLS module. Like I said, I do have some interop testing, mostly based locally on Go dots. Ping and mitigation requests are working. Configuration, session configuration stuff is in progress. I'm hoping I will have something working there soon. And I began testing against NCC Group's public server. Hopefully I'll be able to coordinate with John more. I've run into some problems actually at the handshake stage, but hopefully I'll be able to overcome that pretty quickly. Next slide. That covers it for now.
Okay, any questions for Andrew? Please, Frank.
Hi, Andrew. It's Frank. I just have a comment on this a different kind of DOS demo and how to interoperate between them. Currently, I think we have several rounds of interoperability tests between different vendors and companies. But I haven't seen we test use cases such as if the network link is under the under the very bad situation, it's very congested by the attack traffic, and how our protocol can really work. So it's a general comment that maybe next time we should consider this extreme condition, because I think that's a very key case that we want to solve and cope with.
Yeah, I strongly agree with you. I think that's very important, especially watching the network traffic during the DTLS handshake for the PKI forms of authentication. So there's a lot of data going back and forth, and I know the draft covers different ways to try to reduce the amount of traffic going back and forth, especially at the handshake stage. But doing some testing under attack conditions would be very valuable. I think I can see John lining up there.
Yeah, Andrew. Within libcoap, there's the ability to be able to set things up as lossy, and we have actually done some stress testing, which found some, how should we put it, undesirable features in libcoap, which have now been fixed. So yeah, we certainly need to be able to continue doing that kind of stress testing to work things through. In terms of the interoperability, yep, I saw you come onto our system, Andrew, and there seems to be some read failure, I guess. I may be covering it in my next couple of slides, just your setup and my setup don't agree over something.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, in that case, thanks, Andrew. And to move on to the next one, John, yeah, don't sit down, please. You're up. You were going to talk about the NCC group implementation.
And you can move your slides if you want. Yourself. You are fully in control.
I'm fully invested with it. Yeah. Is it just the right hour?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so this is not so much an implementation, but it's a status of what's available for people who want to try and interact with interoping. The server is publicly available. There's some details on this slide as to. Sorry?
Closer to the microphone.
Closer to. Is that better? No, we've lost sound. Take it in your hand. Yeah.
There's no one in the back. Oh, the battery is dead. So we take the.
Thank you. Okay.
Go on.
Yeah, so sorry about that. Just basically, this is not so much an implementation, but is a status of what is available there should one want to do interop tests, find out what's going on there. So information's here in the slide. So to access the server, it's hosted at .server.ddos-secure.net. And we're now listening on both ports 4646, which have not yet been officially approved, as well as the CoAP 5684 ports. We also have data channel as well. So if you want to come in and play with the data channel and see what happens, there is support for that as well. The requirement on the data channel is that SNI is set within the initial setup sessions so that we steer the traffic, specifically having hit port 440 into the DOTS environment as opposed to there's another environment on that same port there. In terms of PKI certificates, we're currently set up to use the NTT DOTS client certificates. You can use one of those. We can provide others. If lots of people come in at the same time using the same certificate, which today we allow, in the future we probably won't, you'll get, someone said mitigate A, and then someone comes in at B and we'll see A is being mitigated. Yeah, it's a bit of confusion, but we can provide other certificates sitting in there. Another requirement that we have is that you identify on the client what is your CA certificate, because we're doing mutual authentication by having a common CA certificate between the client and the server. In terms of appreciate key, if you want to play with that as well, keys 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the identifies identity for DOTS. We can add in extra ones, but that's a starting place of what's in there. We don't care whether you come in with UDP or TCP. Both are fully supported. We actually have Happy Eyeball supported in terms of our client talking to an external server. We have a restricted set of IPs that can be allowed to be mitigated. So if you try and say, I want to mitigate an IP outside of what's down there, you'll get back a suitable error message. If you choose one of those particular ones will get done. So again, it allows you to do a variety of testing. We actually have, for one of those IPs, there will be incrementing statistics that are reported back to you if you want to sort of test out your status of what is happening on the mitigation. So we have that capability there. In terms of setting up DOTS clients, we can talk to your server somewhere. All I need to know is where is it and what is it listening on. Information's here, so I'll need a client certificate maybe, or if we're using PSK, I need that kind of information to go out and deal with the appropriate stuff. We also have the support for a gateway, so you can come in to our DOTS server. You can be gatewayed through to your DOTS server, so your client comes into our gateway and gets relayed through. All we need to know is the association between you, the client, and you, the server, so we just join the two together for relaying stuff through. And so that gives us the abilities that, based on two different client identifiers, you can either come to us and be gatewayed through to a server, or you can come to us and just talk directly as a server. So you have the flexibility of being able to test things out. Current functionality, we are, I won't say 100% supporting the -17, but it's pretty complete. There is a couple of minor exceptions which are coming out in the 18. When we generate CUIDs and MIDs, we actually put them into the URI path, so that's when we're as a client talking to you as a server, but we as a server will accept it both as a path or a query. So we support the old true 17 or the potential 18 sitting in there. The data channel 13, the only difference between the 13 and what we're actually supporting is because NetBod ACL has changed the rules in terms of how things are laid out in terms of the ACL parameters, etc. We're supporting the latest version of theirs, which is in the 14 draft. Any questions come out of that?
Okay, in that case, thank you, John. Thanks for the report. And NCC runs a public instance of that server, so that's a resource if you're developing a client to do your own interop testing to bootstrap you if you don't have a server implementation. So that brings us to the end of the discussion about known implementations. We have just a smidge amount of time allocated if anyone in the room has an implementation that has not previously been talked about and they would like to bring it to the working group. Okay, I'm taking that as a no that there are no other implementations here represented that want to talk at the working group. So that closes the time we have to talk about the implementation work to date. And so now let's talk about the protocols themselves that we spent the last half hour talking about the implementation of. So Med, you're up. Oh, Tiru is up. Okay.
No, I actually have to check.
No, I made a mistake on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Tiru is up. So we're talking about the data in the signal draft.
Next slide, please.
Sorry, which one? We talk signal? Yeah, okay. Okay.
Sorry, Matt, I got confused, yeah.
Yeah. The agenda is to go over the list of changes we have done to the draft after the interim meeting and the next steps for the draft. Thanks. The next, one of these issues was discussed in the mailing list and was raised by John that we had a problem with multiple gateways or a single gateway between the DOTS client and DOTS server where misconfiguration or DNS cache poisoning could cause infinite loops. To handle that, we had introduced a new CoAP option by the name hop limit. It was added as a CoAP option and not as a parameter because to accommodate the various request types, especially the GET request, which does not have a body. So for that, we had to also update the IANA consideration section to assign a new code point for the CoAP option and also a new error code 5.06 in case if the hop limit reaches 0. So an error can be sent back to the client and the intermediate gateways could see that the hop limit has reached 0 and could detect an infinite loop. This was another implementation bug that was found out during the implementation by John and reported by him, where we noticed that many of the implementations in CoAP are using float for representing the acknowledgement timeout. And we cross-checked with the authors of 7252, and we figured out that that specification never defines the data type because it's just local configuration, and there was no need to specify explicitly whether it's an int or a float. So we wanted to clarify and update this draft to say that because dot signal configuration requires a negotiation of the configuration and message transmission parameters, so it's been updated to a float type to be inconsistent with the existing implementations. Yeah, this was one important bug that was raised by John, that currently RFC 7252 has a limitation that only one token can be bind per client destination pair, which pretty much restricts that a DOTS client cannot observe the mitigation status of multiple mitigation requests, and which violates the RFC 7641 for the observe option to get unsolicited responses from the server for mitigation status. So to address that, Med has already raised an errata with the RFC 7252 to fix that, and we also have fixed the draft to use to convey CUID, the client domain identifier, and the mitigation ID in the URI path parameter rather than in the URI query. So we have unique resources identified, and each resource would be uniquely identified by a token, and the client simultaneously can get unsolicited responses for multiple mitigation requests. Maxage, this was an overlook that when we were going through CoAP, we did not look into the MaxEdge option. And thanks to John, we had a config interval defined for session configuration negotiation, where the config interval tells the client when to contact the server to get the latest configuration from the server. But then there is a MaxEdge option in CoAP, which pretty much says that if CoAP MaxEdge is not defined or written, the default value is 60, and in which case the client has to frequently, every 60 seconds, has to contact the server for a new configuration change. So we have updated the draft that instead of config interval, we would be using the MaxEdge. That would make the CoAP implementation pretty straightforward. That would leverage the existing option. And then to avoid frequent round trips between the client and server, the value of 0 is not recommended. 2 power 32 minus 1 is for infinite lifetime. And a client which is misbehaving and does not contact the server after the expiry of MaxEdge would be considered a bad client and would be disconnected by the server. The exception to those rules are where the client is subjected to a DDoS attack and it cannot reach the server. In this case, the server can make an exception and ignore not receiving refresh requests from the client and continue to maintain the DTLS session. And the client can also ignore sending refresh requests during when the mitigation is active. We had also identified various nits that were discussed in the working group. For example, we had clarified in the text that the client unique identifier, the client domain identifier, and mitigation ID need not appear in the message body and can be only conveyed in the URI parameters. It was also conveyed that the configuration and message transmission parameters can either be present in the mitigating config or the ideal config containers and need not be present in both. Thanks to our area director, she approved 4646 as the port for DOTS, and Med filled the form, and it's being sent by our chairs to IANA. And we are waiting for response from IANA for an permanent allocation. So this work is under progress, and the working copy, the 18th version, is available at this location, and we plan to publish a revised draft very soon.
So sorry if I can interrupt. Based on the allocation, that is all correct, but we want to emphasize it's the chairs that have actually dropped the ball. The AD have cleared the approval. We are in contact with IANA. We just have not submitted the input to get that early allocation, but we are approved for that early allocation. So there is no AD action.
Yeah, but we missed the last step. So yeah, no credit deserved in this case. Maybe some bashing. Yeah. Okay. Please continue. Sorry.
No problem.
No, before the plenary.
So we plan to publish 18 version pretty soon this week. And I think from all the interop testing so far that had happened, there's no pending issues in signal channel, and it looks pretty good for working group last call from the other side. Any comments, questions?
This is Andrew Mortensen. I just have a couple. One is a question about whether we need to establish minimum required cipher suites. What we have right now is a reference to RFC 7525 in the draft. Some of my experiences interacting with the other implementations makes me wonder if we need to be a little bit more explicit about what is minimally required there, particularly with PSK. I don't know that we want to be recommending the choice of, for example, the CCM8 cipher suites that Tiny DTLS is offering. And then separately, although this might be a little bit of a distraction at this point, so I'd be interested to hear some comments. There was a period where we made some adjustments to the requirements draft based on some feedback that we wanted to leave space potentially for the use of Quick in future revisions, which has me wondering if we want to identify specific requests, which are currently just referred to as CoAP get, put, and so on, as specific message types. But beyond that, I don't have any further comments on the current work.
Yeah, regarding Quick, we looked into Quick, and Quick basically today's running is using HTTP on top of that, and it could also use CoAP. But with Quick and CoAP, it would add a large overhead, and CoAP is pretty much using reliable transmission today for most of its messages. So do we really need that? And CoAP is pretty much giving us both the flexibility of being reliable or unreliable. That's not the the way Quick is going towards, and it's not designed for running in a constrained environment like CoAP is being designed. So we can have that discussion in the mailing list. Regarding the cipher suits, what I have added a specific section to discuss the TTLS profile and what mandatory cipher suits the client and server should implement. We can go over that and see if any changes needs to be done there. But it's pretty much what the latest RFCs say, what cipher suits should be supported, and that's what we're just following rather than trying to do something new. So we can go over that and discuss in the mailing list.
Hi, Kanami Nishikawa from IETF. Just a clarification. So you mentioned float for ACK timeout, but is that decimal 64 like ACK random factor? Because
yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so there seem to be no further questions. So then a question from the chairs. So there have been, we have heard several implementations, and at least the feedback I saw in the implementations was like, oh, actually they were built on 17 and they were relatively consistent. So I'm not sure. Yeah, actually the question would be, what's the opinion in the room? Is this draft close to ready for working group last call? Are there some issues still left that we need more discussion based on the implementations you did? Okay, this was maybe stupid to make an open question.
Are there, I mean, do folks in the room foresee any big issues that we're not talking about that would prevent us from going to working group last call? If you have a bigger issue that we're not talking about, or you'd like to bring up an issue, please come to the mic.
Yeah, I think subject to -18 rather than -17. Yes, we are in a good, stable place. I'm of the opinion that we need to get this out there and then work on maybe additions later on. You know, otherwise we're just going to get bogged down if there's a lot of other kind of extra stuff thrown in. We have something that is pretty stable and seems to be working, and I believe we should be going forward with what we have in this first instance.
Okay, thank you.
I agree with John. This is Andrew Mortensen. I agree with John. I also would really like to hear some more about the performance under stress, as Frank was mentioning, to see if there are any things that shake out of that.
Hey, Nick Teague. I just wanted to second the thing about getting it out there sooner rather than later, and then we can add features and other bits and pieces as we go.
Yeah, so, no, actually I need to go to the other mic. So Tobias Gondrom Huawei, no working group chair head on. So I'm happy with this. I fully agree. Just one note, like my experience in the IETF is like minor updates happening later may or may not happen. So if your expectation is that you need to make changes, then maybe we need to do the tests now before we go into working group last call. If you say, actually, this is okay now and changes are unlikely, then yeah, we go.
Bob Moskowitz, agency consulting. This is just between proposed standard and standard. We get the proposed standard out there. We've done our best due diligence. We believe strongly we got it. Then after you start getting some real experience, you say, oh, crud. And that's what the BIS is for, and then going that to get to final standard. So if we have a group say that we've done our due diligence here now, and we've done some testing, we think we got it, then we should go forward with it. That's my feel on it.
Okay, so let's frame it another way. Would there be any objections to going to a working group last call with -18? And if there would be, if you could talk us through what your thinking is. I'm making sure.
Yeah. Going one, going
Twice? Okay. In that case, what we'll do is make our working plan that at -18, we're going to go working group last call, and depending on what we find, we'll determine our course of action from there. Okay, thanks, Tiru. All right, then the next presentation is we're going to talk about the data channel. So that's you, Med. Is it dead again?
This is an update of the data channel specification.
Is the mic hot?
No.
Unbelievable. Like today is the day of broken light. There's battery again. Fortunately, we switched this one. So
Again, get the next one. Okay, like I become the working group runner. So, well, at least that keeps me fit. So here you go.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Hope this is a bit better. Yes, so this is an update of the current state of the data channel specification. So there will be a list of issues that we have discussed so far in the mailing list, and then what we think to be the next steps for this specification. So just as a reminder, during the last interim meeting, we discussed a list of issues that we have identified for the specifications. Some of them are not real issues, but we do think that it is worth for the working group to discuss them and to make sure that what we have recorded in the specification is aligned with your expectation as a working group. So I won't go through this list, but because I will go through them individually, and then we have made an update of the specification to be aligned with the latest version of the ACL netmod specification, because there are some iterations there in the netmod working group that affect our specification here. So the current version we have in the GitHub are completely aligned with the latest version of the netmod specification, but this one is not published yet. The first issue was about the lifetime handling. We agreed during in the previous version of the data channel that there is a need to have the lifetime associated with the aliases that we are associating with the DOS client, and also with the filtering rules that we are creating. The rationale behind that is that we want to avoid to have still mapping in the server and to end up with an infinite list of entries there without having any clue from the server how to clean up the entries. But the problem is that if we go with the current RISC-conf mode, is that if a client suggests a hinted lifetime value, but the server decides to assign a distinct life value, there is no means in the RISC-conf protocol to return the assigned value in the protocol itself. So we had this. It's more about the technicalities of the protocol. So what we have suggested on the mailing list, and what we invited you to share the comments, and the conclusion that we had from the discussion is that we are not indicating anymore any lifetime in the request to the server. We are assuming that there is a minimum default value which is honored by the server. So the server, if we need to accept a filtering entry or an alias entry, it must maintain that entry for at least the 1 week that we have indicated as a default value. So then the clients, if they don't refresh beyond that lifetime, so the server is free to clean up the entry. But the clients, if they want to maintain the entry, they are invited to send a refresh before the expiry of the date. And of course, the clients, they can contact the server to get the pending lifetime from the server so that they know what is the current value, and then they can refresh before the alias or the filtering entry is expired. I don't know if there is any objection from the room here, because this is exactly what we have as a conclusion from the mailing list. So it is time, if there is no further, or if there is no objection about this conclusion, this will what will be recorded in the next version of the specification. Is there any objection to this resolution? Okay, so we go to the second issue. It's about the filter direction. in the data channel specification, we are assuming that the denial of service attack that we are covering is the one which targets the client. So the destination is always the client. So for us, we are assuming there is no need to specify the destination, because by default the destination will be the target target network. But in the discussion among the authors, there is this famous use case which is called the call home, and there's the discussion whether there is a need to cover both the destination and the source address. But the conclusion of the discussion we had on the mail list is that the call home is only the other scenario in the other way around. It's just we are changing the roles, and the target will be the network, and the source will be the customer network. And as far as the DOTS channel specification is concerned, there is no implications there, because always the destination will be the network which is hosting the DOTS client, and not the one which is hosting the DOTS server. So the conclusion is that there is no modification to be added to the specification, and we are just okay with what we have in the current specification. The next issue and the point that we discussed is about the filter activation. The point is whether we assume that whenever the DOTS client sent a filtering request to the server, do we assume that the filtering entry will be immediately enforced by the DOTS server, or it will be only enforced during the mitigation time? The conclusion we had is that we should cover both, because we have use cases for both the flavors for the activations. So in the updated version of that we have on the GitHub, we defined what we call the activation type, and it will take two values, whether the activation will be immediate or only during the mitigation time. And it's up to the server to decide whether it has to honor the request as per the quota for a given DOTS client. So there is this new active parameters that we added into the model, and then there's the question whether if there is no activation type which is indicated by the client. So by default, we assume that the activation type will be during the mitigation time and not immediately. The other issue is about the scope of the filtering. If you consider that you have a DOTS domain in which you have multiple DOTS clients, do you assume that all the filtering rules that are instantiated by a given client do apply only for that given DOTS client, or it will apply for the whole domain? Again, what the conclusion we had on the mailing list is that if this is something which will be immediately enforced, so this will be applied for the global domain, because there is no way at the packet level to identify a DOTS client. It will apply on the traffic. But when there is when this filtering will be applied only during the mitigation time, this will be only specific for a given DOTS client and not for all the DOTS clients, because there will be a potential conflict between the hints that will be provided by DOTS clients, and it is more safe that we associate the filtering rules with a given DOTS client. So that's the current rationale that we discussed on the mailing list. I don't know if there are some problems there, or if we have to change what the outcome of this conclusion. So there is one open question there. Yes, Fleming.
Oh, come here. Sorry.
Yeah.
We have to swap a moment until we get the second mic.
Thank you. Fleming Andreessen. So I have not followed the mailing list discussion on this one, so bear with me as I think through this in real time. I don't recall to what extent we said that things were done on a per domain basis versus on a per client basis. Maybe this is something that we just need to look at a little bit more from an overall architectural point of view. Yeah, that's my only comment. So, let's look more at this offline. I'm not sure right now.
Okay, we'll do that.
The problem if the ACL is installed per entire domain, right? I mean, it would be a side effect and an implicit rule rather than an explicit rule, right? It becomes an implicit rule if the ACL is applied for the entire domain, where the client may or may not be intending to apply this ACL for the entire domain, and it becomes a debugging and auditing problem. The second issue that I see is we have a use case where we are anticipating in future where application servers do act as DOTS clients, right? Now, there could be a scenario where application servers all the time get infected with, I don't know, botnets, malware, whatever it could be. And if they install some bad filter which basically adversely affects the blacklist and whitelist, right, it has impact on the entire domain, right? So based on the authentication authorization, if you have an explicit rule saying what destination network that a client can install, and if that rule doesn't specify that, it makes it a global scope for the entire domain, and that basically creates an attack vector, is my understanding.
Thank you for clarifying. Yes, so, but still this is an open question that we have for the working group, and there is no resolution for so far, whether we need to mandate to have the destination network for the filtering rules that are specific for this case, or as a global recommendation when we are asking the DOTS server to install the filtering, whether we let the DOTS server to determine the destination network to be protected, or we have to mandate the DOTS client to explicitly indicate the networks themselves that need to be protected. So again, feedback and comments on this are very welcome on the mailing list. This one is about the filtering fields and whether we need to list the mandatory to be supported fields to be supported by the protocols. What we have so far is that we are just relying on what we have on the netmod specification. That means there is a list of optional fields there. But the problem is that when you are doing interoperability, you don't know if you are asking your server to do some filtering based on a given field, but the DOTS server does not support that field. So there will be some issues there and complications to honor the request from the DOTS client. So that's why we end up to this to have this a subset of the filtering fields that must be supported by any DOTS implementations, and those are the current proposed fields to be supported by the servers. If the DOTS server supports other actions or other filtering fields, they can indicate that in a new capability container that we introduce, so the clients can ask the DOTS server what are the list of the filtering field that you are supporting, and based on that, the DOTS client may ask the DOTS server to install some filters based on this fields. There was a discussion, a proposal from Tiro to include the TTL as part of a mandatory field. We didn't include that there because for me it's not that. I would say there are cases in which this is not really a mandatory to be supported. I don't know if you think that this list is long or is short or is I don't know. So this kind of really feedback and comment we need to hear from the working group so that we enhance the specification accordingly. Yes, Nick.
We need to share the microphone.
I would share the microphone.
We need to share the microphone. Sorry, we have batteries, but now we don't have a microphone.
From my perspective, I think the list. I mean, it's going to be advisory anyway, but I think the list is maybe a bit short because I think from more of a DDoS standpoint, you'd be looking at more capability into something like FlowSpec. So the addition, anything in FlowSpec, things like DSCP, all that kind of funky stuff that comes. Well, like packet length, the stuff that's very FlowSpec-y would be some additions that we would like on there, from my perspective anyway.
I just agree with what Nick said. I think we need to add some DDoS specific parameters like DHCP and length that needs to be added there. But this list looks like a complete list that I have just cross-checked with another draft called MUD, which is working on a manufacturer user description for basically providing access control for IoT devices. So that list also has the same list. So they are also relying on the ACL model, and they pretty much have this list. So we need a small subset, which is in addition to what is there here.
Roland, we see you in the queue. Fleming's going to go, and then you'll go.
Fleming and Dresden. I mean, it looks like a good list from should we say, a network-based DDoS operations point of view. We've also talked about, application-level DDoS attacks, right? URLs, etc. That's perhaps more of a forward-looking thing, but just something to keep in mind. Do we want to mandate all of these, right, for, should we say, higher-level DDoS types of attacks?
Makes sense. There's one more question, Roland. Roland, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Oh, no, I was not speaking. I wasn't aware that I was live. Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. First of all, I wanted to second Nick's comments. This is very important. Secondly, looking at this list, I see ICMP. I don't see ICMP v6. It's probably just an oversight. Needs to be added there. And then finally, with regards to what Fleming just said, I do believe that we need to be looking into layer 7 constructs, things like URIs and DNS resource records and things like that. But that would almost certainly probably be a future thing, and at least in my opinion. Thanks.
It's okay. Okay, so we move to the next issue that we have on the list is about the multiple servers. So this is a comment from John. It's about the behavior that to be followed by a DOTS gateway when there's a request which is forwarded to two upstream servers, but it happens that it receives a success from one of them, but a failure from the others. What will be the behavior of the DOTS gateway with regards to the DOTS client? For me, this is typically the kind of discussion that we wanted to cover in the multi-home draft. So that that's why I suggested to John that we don't need to discuss this kind of consideration in the current base specifications, because the current specifications are really, I would say, targeting the single home scenarios, and all the multi-home in consideration will be left out of scope and will be considered in the other document that we have presented earlier here. I don't know, John, if you want to if you have any further comment about this.
Yeah, sure. It's the challenge with multiple servers is I like to live in a world where redundancy is. And so as part of that, I like to have my primary gateway and my secondary gateway. Yeah. And this current spec doesn't handle it. It handles just a single gateway. I totally appreciate that multi-homing is way beyond just primary and secondary of what's in there, but it's certainly from my perspective, I like to have at least two gateways which are kind of similarly configured and have one of them being active. And my current implementation is, as far as the signal channel is concerned, I have both open, and I choose one of them to send the mitigation request via. But I can't do that with, well, not so easily with the data channel. Is, someone sets up an alias. Do I send it to both gateways who go off to the different? We're into a whole world of strangeness if one of the gateways can't handle it for some reason.
Which is normal because it's not specified so far. So.
Correct. Yeah. So that's part of where I was coming from. That is just my initial thinking was I have just this active standby and I can't handle it in the data channel.
Yeah.
Today.
So Roland, I saw you in the queue and then you left the queue. If you want to speak, please enter the queue again. No. Okay. So maybe the question was addressed.
Okay. So the next issue is about the loop detection and prevention to avoid to have the infinite loops. So this is similar to the one that we have, the feature we have for the signal channel. But for the data channel, just to be frank with you, we didn't think about it that seriously. But there are some existing headers that we can reuse for the REST-conf. And provide this example about the max forward. The max forward, it will limit the number of hops a request can be forwarded upstream. But the problem with this one is that it is only specific to specific HTTP requests. And if you want them to cover also what we are doing in the data channel, there are some I would say extensions, or at least to relax the constraints we have today on the max forward. We have the error which is already there for HTTP that we can reuse and so on. But so my request to you and for the working group is to if you have any suggestion or if you have any favorite option that you want us to go to cover or to integrate the loop text for the data channel, please speak up and share your thoughts and comments with us. This is just as a reminder that we have all the changes are maintained on the GitHub, and there is the 14 versions that will be published just right after the meeting. Yeah, so the floor is yours. If you have any further issue that you want us to discuss, or if you have any question or clarifications that you want us to provide, so feel free to raise your questions.
Yeah, the mic works.
One clarification question about the number 3 issue. Yeah, so in signal channel, it is said that mitigation scope should check its confliction status with whitelist. So when there is a mitigation request, the confliction of mitigation scope with whitelist filter should be done for registered whitelist or active whitelist. That is the question.
Yeah, in the current signal channel specification, we are just saying that there is a conflict with an existing filtering. We don't say if that filtering is currently applied on the network or will be applied during the mitigation time, but there is a conflict. So if the mitigation request assume that there is an attack which is ongoing, that means that this will be a conflict with both of type of the filtering, the one which is currently enforced on the network and the one that will be available as a hint for the DOTS server. So my answer is that we don't need to clarify in the signal channel whether we are covering both, because this is implicitly assumed.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
But if you think that this is something which is need to be explicitly said, we can do it. But for me, it is obvious. That's
I agree. So the text about the filtering activation will be included in the next.
Sorry.
The text about filter activation will be included in the next draft.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Nick Teague. So I haven't really been following much on the list because I've been really busy recently. But as far as the filtering rules are activated by default or only when a mitigation is active. So there are obviously these cases where you have always-on customers who connect to you and want you in their path all the time for whatever reason, and so that would be covered with your activation.
blue sheet on it somewhere in the room? Can the person holding it raise it up or bring it forward, please? And does anyone else need to sign a blue sheet? If you do, if you could catch the one coming up. Is the blue sheet somewhere back there? Okay, someone still has it. Okay, very good. Just want to make sure we didn't lose it. Okay, next up, we're going to talk about our informational drafts. The first one planned is the architecture document, and Andrew's going to be presenting that remotely. So we're bringing that up on the screen for you.
All right, great. Yep, we've
Okay,
got
just in time.
Yeah, we've got remote audio. We're good. All right. Thanks. This is just an update on the DOTS architecture. I published a sort of a provisional 06 revision early this morning, and there will probably be at least one more before we really want to talk about adopting working group last call, just as a preface. But let's move on to the next slide. All right, so we'll cover the changes and then the obstacles to working group last call. Next slide, please. There seemed to be consensus following the last meeting that the working group wanted to see a not consideration section, primarily about the need to prevent the DOTS client from requesting mitigation for private IP space. So that is, there's a new not consideration section in the 06 revision. And the next slide, please. We'll cover some of the details. There's a reference to RFC 8085, which is really covering the not keep alive for UDP. I would appreciate a little bit of feedback on whether we actually also want to make a reference to not considerations for a TCP signal channel, or just DOTS in general, signal and data channel for TCP and not considerations. And as I mentioned, we're really looking to include some discussion of mapping internally detected attack scopes to the public mitigation scope required to provide to the DOTS server in the mitigation request. Next slide. So this new section, which is in some ways rather naive and needs some reworking. I've added 3 subsections, which involve direct provisioning of the external address to the internal address spaces. There's a very rudimentary stun binding request response section, which Tiro's already given some very good feedback on about some of the naivety that's been involved in that particular section. We will probably need to expand that rather considerably to cover ICE and turn as well. And then we've added a section for DNS names, which would allow the internal resources to provide a DOTS mitigation scope if they're internally and externally resolvable. The DOTS client does not need to know the IP address mapping at all. Next slide. So the obstacle to working group last call is really the feedback on that considerations. Tiro's already kicked that off on the working group mailing list. Using his feedback, I think we'll be able to make some rapid progress on this. And barring that work, we have no other open issues. I'm hoping to get this wrapped up actually by the end of this week. Hopefully we'll have an 07 draft with the additional changes. And then I'd like to proceed to working group last call rapidly after that. Last slide, please.
Okay, so Andrew, if I could just restate what I heard you say, there is that last issue. I see some discussion on that issue on the mailing list. You think we can get it wrapped up by the end of next week, and then we'd be ready for working group last call?
That's my hope, yes.
Okay. Would you prefer that we stagger the working group last call on the requirements, let that finish before we issue that for the architecture?
I don't really have a preference. Okay. Partly because I don't anticipate a lot of additional feedback on the requirements draft.
Okay, then if the schedule works, we will then run them in parallel if need be. Thank you. Are there comments on the architecture document?
So actually, in particular, one question for me is there any particular feedback on the net considerations that we still have as a note here? Any additional points? Or actually, let me rephrase this. Is there anything else beyond the net that we haven't mentioned? No, you can stay. Don't worry. Like, you don't need to run away.
I wanted just to say that I think that we need to have more time to review the current text before launching the working group classical on the architecture, so that to make sure that the net considerations is aligned what we have already provided in the signal channel and also in the channel, because we have already a net consideration discussions there. That's to align things and then start the working group classical on the architecture. Apart from that, I think that the architecture document is almost stable, and we have the main points to be discussed are already covered.
Yeah, we would prefer to kind of push forward. I mean, we'll have Andrew release the draft with the tentative changes. If they're not good, we can potentially do another call, working group last call, or we can kind of fix it after review.
Hey, okay, cool. So that was the architecture draft.
So if you could pull up the last slide of the chair slides.
Yes, coming up.
Okay, so the last topic we have is the use case document, which is an informational, and we, in a sense, need your help. We've done various kind of structural reformatting of it. We've talked a lot about the use cases kind of themselves, and we are not making progress. So we have a couple of questions kind of structured here to help us get there. So what you see projected right now are two hums that we are going to do, and we wanted to share the questions with you ahead of time before you see the material. So there has been some conversation related to whether we need the HomeNet use case. So after the next presentation of use cases is done, the first hum we're going to do is ask, are there objections to removing the use case? And then the next hum that we're going to be doing is contingent on the content you're going to be seeing in the next presentation, which is which sets of use cases we want to use in the -11, whether it's going to be the basis of the use cases currently in the draft or what is about to be presented. And I see some puzzled looks, and it'll be a little clearer after you see the presentation. So I would ask that you kind of listen to what's about to get presented. We're going to do two hums, and we need your help as the working group. The editor team needs actually your help in deciding which course of action to take. And without that, we are going to be really unable to publish kind of this document, because the editor team needs clarity on which way to process that document. So you will see this slide again, and we will hum kind of twice and we'll talk a little bit more about that after Daniel's kind of presentation around use cases. So Daniel.
Is it?
Yeah, I think that's it. Is that right? Yeah, that's you.
Good evening, everyone. So, okay, thank you. So the use case document, I sent a few comments on the version 9. And then, well, in order to move forward, I just like to get your feedbacks on what would be the most appropriate way to have the version 11. So this presentation is really intended to illustrate some of the, well, I mean, at least my view on how we should move the document forward. So it basically roughly applying the comments I provided on the mailing list. And I'd like your feedback to know if it's the right way or if you have to take another way. Mostly, it's not a big change. It's mostly organizational. It limits, it reduced the number of use cases. So I'm stating 3 use cases instead of multiple additional use cases. And it also limits the level of details to the DOTS protocol. So there are a lot of information, but maybe this information at some point I found not so more informative, but not really relevant in a DOTS context. So the end result is an ugly copy-paste, but it still provide, well, the intent was really to provide you a high-level view of what we may go. So there are 3 use cases I think that are relevant for that document. The first one is when you have an overlay DDoS mitigation managed by a service provider that has nothing to do with the customer. I think this example should be probably presented as the first one because it provides a full description on what are the different entities interacting together and provide a description of how the DOTS exchange should be. Then there is an expected common use cases, which is where your ISP is actually hosting the DDoS mitigation. So it's very close to the use case 1, except that you have a binding between the link and the service. So it could be useful, but it had some small constraint. And rather than starting the use case 2 from scratch, I just build and focus on the difference with use case 1. And the main motivation for use case 2 is that is a use cases that seems to me quite relevant and that's going to be widespread in the future. And the last use case is use case 3, where DOTS is being used as a way to manage and to orchestrate different DOTS servers. So there is a coordination and so on. So these are the 3 use cases I think are really relevant to the document. And it seems to me that some of the other use cases described in version 10 or 9, because I mostly based my work on my comments were for version 9, are tiny, could be very easily derived from the main, from more generic and main use cases. The other changes are that I've removed the HomeNet use case. Well, this use case, I was the one introducing these use cases, so I feel less guilty to remove that one. But it seems to me that we didn't have a real consensus whether it was a useful use case. And it was also maybe a use case that misled the team into splitting the use cases between internal use cases and external use cases. So interdomain and intradomain use cases, which may not be relevant to at that stage. So yeah, so I see some people in the line.
Fleming Andreas, and just a question for clarification. How long do you think the document will be if you implement these changes?
So how long you mean in time or in number of pages?
Number of pages.
I think I have made some copy paste of the document. Maybe you can show that.
Just give me a rough idea.
10 pages.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
From what I remember.
Any specific reason for removing the HomeNet use case?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Any specific reason for removing the HomeNet use case?
Well, the reason is that it seems to me that we didn't have an agreement on whether this use case was relevant or not.
Sure.
And that's the reason. So for some time, I thought I was the only one concerned about this use case.
That looks like a good use case to me.
Okay.
So I can give you an explanation why it's an interesting use case, right? So, for example, my company, McAfee, is providing home security. So we have security software running on CPE, right? And this is something that we could do basically to provide home security where we can protect the home network from DDoS attacks or the home network launching DDoS attacks, right? Now, one specific change in the protocol that basically for a HomeNet use case that I can bring you is the call home feature, where the DOTS client running on we need a DOTS server on the CPE basically, but you don't really want to run a server. So RESTCON gives you a capability where you initially act as a client, talk to the ISP, and then ISP degrades himself to act as a client, and the server becomes the client becomes on the CPE becomes a server. That's a call home functionality, basically for home routers to be managed by a cloud service provider or somebody sitting in the ISP to manage them. So there are specific things that the HomeNet use case is bringing, which is quite unique and different from the other use cases that we have, right? Like the call home one, right? Which is not there in the other use cases.
Okay, right. So I'm happy to add.
I mean, if you want to reduce the text, I don't mind it. But
That's
but
okay.
I think it's a special use case which is quite different from the others, and I think we should continue.
Okay,
that.
so you believe it's different from the three others?
We have one more comment in the online remotely from Roland.
Hi there, Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. Yeah, I strongly disagree that it's a unique use case. I believe that the other use cases that are in -9 and -10 was just cleaning up nits and grammar errors, no content changes. There's already another use case that's quite clear that talks about mitigation of outbound DDoS attacks, for example, on a broadband access network. That use case could be modified slightly to incorporate a little bit more of what was just discussed right now in this meeting. The current HomeNet use case, as defined, is not very clear, and there's a lot of verbiage in there. It's just it's not a clear use case at all. And so we already have the outbound stuff taken care of, and the phone home stuff that was just discussed could very easily be added to that other use case to fulfill that particular need. Thank you.
Fleming Andreessen. Yeah, I mean, on the HomeNet use case, I think it's a fine use case. I don't see anything wrong with it. I support it as well. Having said that, I think we're spending an awful lot of time on use cases at this point. So, whatever it takes to move forward.
I had a couple other comments, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So.
Just,
go ahead, sorry.
Just checking, should we first discuss about the HomeNet case before we move to the other points? So let's stay on HomeNet and then kind of narrow that, and then we do the other parts. So who has comments about HomeNet? Yeah, so let's narrow that to
Nick has.
Nick
Tier.
and Tiro, you also about HomeNet, I guess? So let's focus that one first, so we can.
So very quickly, Nick Teague, it is related to HomeNet, but it's more a case of like the simple use case of this is the fact of like saying help it, make it stop, and that is really the only one use case, and we're just trying to be a bit nuanced. So personally, if there's text that people would like to suggest for HomeNet that they would like in there, then we can just slap that in there and kind of put it to the working group and go from there. I think we are spending too much time on it generally, to going around in circles, removing it, adding it, removing it, adding it. If somebody likes something particularly about it, give us text, we'll stick it in there.
I mean, as long as in use case is not harming the signal dots work, right? I mean, what's the big deal in removing those use cases? They're just different deployment scenarios being used. So what's the hard stop that we have to remove those use cases and make progress?
Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have touched the mic. I think the question goes a little bit to you, whether you would like to propose some text because like you seem that you care about this use case. So, and as Nick mentioned, like if you have something that you want to propose, then put it there.
I'm okay with the existing test.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, if somebody wants to concise or make it crisper, I'm okay with that. But I'm just saying, continue with the text. I don't have any problems with the text.
Okay.
The tech, Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. The text is in need of serious editing if it's going to be included in the draft.
Sure.
So let's ham for the HomeNet use case, and we'll fix.
No, hold on. So we were going to talk about, are there other issues we want to bring up that aren't HomeNet kind of related based on what Daniel was
now we
up?
come to the non-HomeNet questions.
Sorry, I think we turned away a couple people from the mic.
So please come back to the mic if you have topics that were beyond HomeNet. And I think Roland is already in the queue to start the discussion.
Right.
Roland,
yeah. First of all, I want to thank Daniel for all the work that he's done in thinking about this and putting together this proposal. My view is that while, yes, people who are familiar with the DDoS arena and with the concepts that are outlaid or laid out in the three proposed use cases can easily derive many of the other use cases. Many of the people who would benefit the most from this document are not familiar with DDoS, and they're not familiar with the operational world, or if they're operational people, they're not cognizant of all the different considerations. They don't understand necessarily what is outside the scope of DOTS versus what's inside the scope of DOTS. And that is, from my perspective, is the value of those additional use cases. So my suggestion would be that we don't condense it down into 3. My further suggestion is, if the consensus of the working group is that we do condense it down to 3, then my suggestion would be that we actually use the upstream transit provider case as use case number 1, because that's actually conceptually simpler than the overlay case. And so flip those 2 in the list of 3 in Daniel's presentation. Thanks.
My clarification question was, why do we need a DOTS client on the phone? Is it going to be running on a browser, or what's the use case for that?
It's clearly outlined in the use case currently that they're in in 09 as well as 10, and actually that use case has been in the document for several revisions.
Maybe I missed that.
Can I ask what the difference would be between having a DOTS client on a phone and a client on the phone communicating through a portal that had a DOTS client?
Yeah, Andrew, and this is Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. That it's the same thing. There's a web portal for manual activation, and in the case of the phone, it's again acting as a personal portal for manual activation of the service.
Thanks.
Yeah. On the mic.
Tamar Gavrichenkov once again. So in October, I've sent a suggestion of adding a new use case, namely end user with an upstream transit provider or MSSP offering DDoS mitigation services on the permanent basis. So as far as I can understand from the conversation on the mailing list, this was sort of accepted, but it's still missing from draft 10. So the question is, are there plans to incorporate this into draft 11?
Yeah. Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. That's actually not a separate use case. That's just a separate mode of operation. I do agree with you that it should be explicitly stated that there are 2 different primary modes of mitigation, either number 1, on-demand diversion and reinjection, or number 2, permanent diversion in line, as you know, whether it's physically in line or logically in line, as you mentioned. So that does need to be addressed in whichever form the group decides that the document should take. Thanks for bringing that up again.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else you want to say in your presentation, Daniel?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Daniel. So we're gonna do a little bit of humming. Can we get the slide back?
Yeah, just thinking whether I have one more comment here.
So, Tobias Gonrom, Huawei, Working Group Chair, Head of. So before we go into this humming, the one thing that I care is that this gets done, frankly. Like, we have been running around this use case draft for quite a long time. The last update didn't really make many changes. It's good that we had some grammar editorial changes. That's okay, but like, we were still missing this use case that was just mentioned, and like, I really hope us to get this through. So, from the perspective of HomeNet, I'm ambivalent. Like, okay, if you get good text, okay, I'm happy to have it. If not, then I'm also happy. And when it comes to the formatting, actually, I have a slight preference for a streamlined option as Daniel proposes it, because I think it will like help the reader to go through that. And maybe you will not be so easily lost in a large number of cases. And especially actually, this would be a question for me personally, not as a chair, to Daniel. Like, if you're committed to make these changes, that would also help me to go for, okay, do it. Because left door, right door, both open, so it's fine. But as long as we get through that door eventually.
Yeah, the question after we do some humming device is the resource question, because we don't have a lot of energy in bringing closure to this draft, and that's the other thing we need, irrespective of what we do with the text. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Ken.
So what we can also do is I can commit the current version mentioned in the, if it accepted, to the GitHub, and we work all on the GitHub and get that version no later than a month from now. That's
okay.
I don't want to commit more than a month.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Okay. The first question we are going to hum is framed around the fact that we have an editor team right now working on this use case document, and the two different elements of that editor team have said the HomeNet use case should be removed. We need working group feedback to the editors about whether the HomeNet use case should stay in or out. So I'm going to frame this as the text is there. Hum, please, now, if there is an objection to removing the HomeNet use case.
Now we need to make the counter test to see whether everybody's sleeping. Please hum now if you are in favor of removing the HomeNet use case. Okay, so people are not sleeping. So
You just hummed into the mic.
no, I didn't hum.
I didn't hum.
No.
Somebody hit it, yeah.
Okay, let's do it again. Let's test this again. So who's in favor of removing the HomeNet use case? So some humming before silence.
Yeah. Maybe it wasn't all of them.
Okay, good. So can we take this as consensus to remove it at this point?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, AD.
Okay, so that is hum number one. Now, the second hum we're going to do is going to consider the structure of the document. Again, the editor teams have proposed two different structures to what is in the current text, and they need your feedback to tell them what to do with that text. So option one, so the first hum we're going to be asking is about keeping the existing structure in the text, that's -10, but also it's also -9, and it's been in the last couple versions, that structure has been the same. The second hum we'll ask, the option two, is there was a restructuring proposed down to 3 use cases that Daniel just presented on, or would you prefer that option? Fleming, you want to restructure the options?
I do not, but I would like to ask a question of the authors first, which is there a difference in when we're going to get a final document depending on which option we go with? And if so, what is that difference? I don't know who wants to answer. Daniel?
This is a little bit of the problem we've had.
I can say that it seems to me that option number one requires the least amount of changes.
Thanks, Roland. Daniel?
Thank you. So my understanding is that it's a simple document would be easier to get the review, and that once in the last call, it would go smoothly to the ISG, while a complex version might get a lot of feedback and raise a lot of discussions.
So with the working group chair head on, like, we also debated about this, and I think in the end there's probably pros and cons on both sides for the speed of this. I mean, looking at what we've seen for the changes from Daniel, as most of this is reorganizing, this is probably not going to take a lot of time to do. So some time gained, some time lost. Yeah, might be a wash.
Okay, let's hum. Okay, so to restate, there's going to be two options to hum on. Option one is going to be keep the existing structure less the home net we just decided on. Option two will be use the revised structure of 3 primary use cases that Daniel just splashed up in the presentation. So,
Hum for option one.
Okay, if you would like to hum for option one, please hum.
Stop the mic now. Roland, we noticed you are humming in the mic, so you know, but now we need to get the room.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Room again.
Okay, if you would like option two, which revises the structure of the draft according to the 3 use cases you just saw in the presentation, please hum now. Okay, so the consensus from the AD listening is that we're going with option 2 on hum 2, which is we are going to pursue a revised structure that's simplified to the 3 use cases that was just in the presentation prior to this slide. So Daniel, you had been saying that you were laying out a notional kind of timeline. So to repeat that, you think you can make all of the changes you had shown in your slide within a month. And after we do that, we go working group last call?
Yeah. I think what I can commit, and probably Roland as well, is that, well, the feedback we will receive on the mailing list will be integrated to the GitHub live so that we reach a final document soon, within a month. Yeah.
So within a month is what we're looking for. Okay. Roland, you're up.
Yes, agreed. Thank you.
Okay, and then there was also some feedback related to Tiru. So Tiru, we talked about, oh, sorry, we voted on the home net already. Sorry.
I have one comment as working group chair. So we have seen, let's say, some delays with the use case draft. And at this point, actually, my face is directly to you, Daniel. So you made this commitment, so within a month, I hope we can have that draft. And if you need help, you can get it. But like this, if I get a commitment from 5 people, then it's not as dependable like as that one from 1 person. So go ahead, don't wait for others, make it happen. Okay, that's my encouraging, begging working group chair. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to the end of the structured portion of our agenda. We still have some time for open mic. So if you have thoughts, comments, concern, feedback, please.
Oh. Okay. That leaves us with one thing. We want to thank our graceful AD for all the great services she did for our working group and all the patience she had with the many slipping milestones. I read somewhere there's no better sound than the swooshing of milestones kind of swooshing by, and like I think we had a great sound with that. So thank you so much, Kathleen, for all the help and the guidance you offered to us. Really.
And as a token of our appreciation, we have a book for you that will, I think, help you remind you of what it was like to be an AD, but also you can maybe use this at home as well.
We don't have this one yet. Thank you.
If you don't mind, let's do this here. Okay. The book is a little bit naughty, but okay.
Thank you. And I look forward to seeing the results of this work and hopefully seeing collaboration across industry with it.
Okay. Okay, with that, we're done. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Bye. Actually, could you do me one favor?
Yeah, how can I help? Can I make you a picture?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, one with me.
Yeah, no, I mean, in front of the thing.
Let's do this here.
Sure, let's do full screen.
As read last time, I think perhaps I'll have mitigation.